The Tonight Show band began playing God Bless America. The audience rose to their feet as Vietnam veteran James Crawford stepped onto the stage in his dress uniform, medals neatly lined across his chest. It was Veterans Day, 1983. Johnny had arranged a modest tribute, just 5 minutes to offer gratitude to a man who had served his nation. But the moment James noticed the standing ovation, he stopped in place. His expression tightened, his shoulders trembled, and in front of nearly 20 million viewers, this highly decorated veteran started to cry. Tears he seemed to have held back for more than 15 years. The audience wasn't sure how to respond. Should they keep applauding? Sit down and let him collect himself? Johnny immediately understood what was needed. He approached James, placed a steady hand on his shoulder, and simply stood beside him. He didn't try to make a joke. He didn't try to hurry the moment. He simply stood beside the veteran and allowed the situation to unfold naturally. When James was finally able to speak, his first words were, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Johnny gently interrupted him. "Don't apologize. Not for this. Not here. Not ever." Then Johnny made a decision that had never occurred on The Tonight Show. He canceled the remaining segments, sent the other guests home, and for the next 40 minutes stayed with James Crawford, letting him share the story he'd never been given room to tell. He spoke about Vietnam, about returning home to hostility, and about carrying the belief that surviving meant he had somehow failed others. That night, Johnny Carson stepped away from his role as a host and became something else, a witness. Someone willing to listen without judgment, without political framing, simply one man hearing another man's experience. It was November 11th, 1983, Veterans Day. Johnny Carson wanted to acknowledge Vietnam veterans. No major production, no political message, just a straightforward gesture. For years, many Vietnam veterans had been treated as if they had done something wrong. They came home to protests, frustration, and a nation that often blamed them for a conflict they didn't create. Johnny felt the least he could do was thank one of them publicly on his show. His team contacted the VA, asking if they could suggest a veteran who might agree to appear, someone who represented what so many had lived through and who might feel comfortable on television. They recommended James Crawford, Medal of Honor recipient, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. His service record sounded almost unreal. James had saved 3 men from a burning helicopter while under enemy fire, carrying them out individually despite being shot at, and returning a 4th time to confirm no one had been left behind. The president had shaken his hand. Newspapers had labeled him a hero. But James didn't view himself that way. He felt like someone who survived when others didn't, and he had been trying to understand that feeling for 15 years. When The Tonight Show reached out, James nearly declined. He didn't like discussing Vietnam, didn't enjoy being called a hero, and didn't want the attention. But his wife encouraged him. Maybe it would help, she suggested. Maybe other veterans needed to see someone like him being thanked. So James agreed. It was only supposed to be 5 minutes, a brief handshake with Johnny Carson. He could manage that. On the day of the taping, James put on his dress uniform, the one he kept tucked away, with medals he rarely wore. His hands trembled as he attached them. His wife noticed and asked if he was all right. James nodded. He wasn't, but he had learned long ago to say that he was. Backstage, James waited in the green room, trying to steady himself. A production assistant entered and said, "Mr. Crawford, you're on in 5 minutes." The plan was simple. Johnny would bring him out, thank him for his service, maybe ask a couple of light questions. Nothing intense, just a respectful moment. James nodded. Nothing heavy. He could manage that. He had been keeping things light for 15 years. The band began playing God Bless America. That was his cue. James rose, adjusted his uniform, and stepped through the curtain onto the Tonight Show stage. The lights hit him, bright and warm. Then he noticed the audience, all standing, applauding, some even tearing up. And with nearly 20 million people watching at home, all focused on him, thanking him, something inside James that he had held back for years finally gave way. He tried to control it, tried to stay steady, stay composed. That was what he was used to doing. That was what many veterans did. But he couldn't. The tears came, strong and overwhelming, the result of carrying far too much for far too long. James stood there in his dress uniform, medals across his chest, and cried openly on national television. Johnny had been waiting by his desk, ready for a handshake. But when he saw what was happening, he walked over immediately. No hesitation. He simply placed a hand on James's shoulder. The applause continued, but it shifted, quieter, more thoughtful, as though the audience understood they were witnessing something meaningful. Johnny remained beside him. He didn't try to change the moment or move forward. He just stood there, sending a silent message. I'm here. Take whatever time you need. It took nearly 2 minutes before James could speak. When he finally did, the first thing he offered was an apology. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Johnny stopped him right away. Don't apologize. Not for this. Not here. Not ever. Johnny then addressed the audience. James, everyone here understands. This is real. This matters more than anything else we planned tonight. And then he made a choice no one expected. He looked toward the cameras in the control room and announced, We're doing something different tonight. We had other guests booked, but I'm sending them home. James deserves more than 5 minutes. He deserves to be heard. The control room reacted immediately. They had major guests waiting, Bill Murray included, and sponsors relying on the schedule. But Johnny had already decided. He walked to his desk, moved a chair next to his own, and invited James to sit beside him, not on the opposite side, but right next to him, like two people simply talking. James, Johnny said softly, tell me about Vietnam. Not the hero parts. Tell me what it was actually like. James looked at Johnny, then at the audience, then at the millions watching at home. And for the first time in 15 years, he spoke honestly. He talked about being drafted at 19, about living in constant fear, about losing friends, about the helicopter crash, and why he went back into the flames, not out of bravery, but because he couldn't have forgiven himself if he hadn't. He described the nightmares that started overseas and never really ended. He described returning home to hostility, being spit on at the airport, being called awful names, feeling as if the nation he served had resented him for serving. Johnny listened closely. He asked questions, not to entertain, but to understand. How do you carry that? Johnny asked at one point. How do you live with it? James shook his head. Honestly, most days I don't know. You wake up and just try to get through. And you don't talk about it, because people don't want to hear it. They want you to be a hero, or they want you to be a villain. They rarely want you to be a person. I want you to be a person, Johnny said. Right now, on this show, you get to be yourself. Not a symbol, not a hero, just James. And whatever you need to say it. So James did. He talked about the guilt, about surviving when others didn't, about feeling like he failed because he couldn't save everyone, about his frustration with a government that sent young people into a conflict it didn't know how to win, about feeling abandoned by the country he had served. The audience stayed completely silent. Some were wiping their eyes. It wasn't what anyone expected from The Tonight Show, but it was something people needed to hear. After about 20 minutes, Johnny asked, What do you wish people understood about Vietnam veterans? James paused. That we were just kids. Most of us were 18 or 19. We didn't know much. We simply did what our country told us to do. And when we came home, we were blamed for it. Like it was our choice. Like we wanted to go. His voice tightened. I just wish someone had said thank you. Not for the war, but for carrying what we carried. For doing what we were ordered to do, and then dealing with everything afterward by ourselves. Johnny turned toward the camera. His voice was steady. Then let me say it now. On behalf of everyone watching, James, thank you. Not only for your service, but for holding a weight that should never have been yours alone. For being strong when the country asked you to be strong. And for being honest tonight when it would have been easier to act like everything was fine. Johnny paused. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took 15 years to say this the right way. I'm sorry we left you and so many others to shoulder this on your own. That wasn't fair. It was never fair. James began crying again, but this time it was different, more like someone finally being acknowledged. They talked for 40 minutes. Johnny sat with James Crawford for the entire segment, discussing war, guilt, and returning to a country that didn't know how to welcome its veterans. The remaining guests never appeared. Bill Murray watched from the green room and told producers, Don't stop this. This matters more than anything I could do. When the show ended, the audience gave a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. James remained on stage, still emotional, still in his uniform. Johnny stood beside him as the country watched two men share a moment that was long overdue. The reaction across America was immediate and overwhelming. The NBC switchboard was overwhelmed. 50,000 calls within the first hour. Veterans phoned in saying they had cried along with James. Families reached out to say they finally understood what their fathers, brothers, and sons had experienced. And most importantly, hundreds of veterans called to say, "Thank you for letting us see that. Thank you for reminding us we're not alone." The next morning, newspapers across the country covered the moment, not as entertainment news, but as a cultural event. Carson's Veterans Day tribute becomes national catharsis, one headline read. Critics who usually wrote about comedy focused instead on grief, understanding, and what it means to honor military service without glorifying conflict. For James, the impact was immediate. He had spent 15 years believing he needed to hide his pain, stay strong, and act like everything was fine. But Johnny had given him permission to speak openly. And in front of 20 million viewers, James shared the things he had never been able to express. His nightmares didn't disappear, and the guilt didn't vanish, but something shifted. He began talking to other veterans. He started attending support groups. He admitted that he wasn't okay, and that acknowledging it was acceptable. "Johnny gave me permission to be human again," James said later. "For 15 years, I thought I had to be the hero people expected, strong and unbreakable. But Johnny let me be honest, and that's what I needed. Not to be fixed, but to be seen." Johnny's choice to cancel the rest of the show sent a clear message. This moment mattered more than entertainment. A veteran's experience mattered more than scheduled interviews. Truth mattered more than maintaining the program format. Other talk shows noticed. They began inviting veterans onto their shows, not as token guests, but as real people. They started discussing PTSD, even before it was widely recognized by that name. They talked about the cost of war for those who serve, and about how society treats the people asked to do difficult things on its behalf. Johnny didn't repair how America treated Vietnam veterans. One show couldn't do that. But he started a conversation. He opened a door. He showed it was possible to honor service while acknowledging the toll it takes, to thank veterans while admitting the nation had failed them. James Crawford lived another 30 years after his Tonight Show appearance. He became an advocate for veteran mental health, spoke at VA hospitals, helped other veterans seek care, and he always credited that night with Johnny as the turning point. Before that, James said, "I thought asking for help meant I was weak. Johnny showed me that asking for help means you're human, and there's no shame in that." Johnny rarely discussed that night publicly. When asked, he brushed it off. "I just let James talk, that's all." But those close to him said it had a deep effect on him. It made him reflect on how society uses people, then forgets them when they're no longer needed. How the public expects sacrifice, then reacts negatively when veterans show the aftermath of that sacrifice. The moment with James wasn't just about one veteran. It was about all of us. About how we treat the people who carry difficult burdens. About whether we are willing to hear the truth when it challenges us. About whether we care more about feeling comfortable or doing what's right. Johnny chose to do what was right. He could have stayed on schedule, given James a short segment, and continued with Bill Murray and the usual lighthearted content. Instead, he canceled the rest of the show. He created space for James to share his reality and allowed the country to see the toll war had taken on those sent to Vietnam. That's a different kind of courage, not the kind shown in combat, but the kind shown when you use your platform for something meaningful. The lesson extends beyond veterans. It's about all of us and how we respond to people carrying emotional weight. Do we give them room to be honest, or do we pressure them to act fine so we don't feel uneasy? Do we listen, or do we hope they move on quickly so we don't have to deal with discomfort? James Crawford needed someone to sit with his pain, not solve it, not dismiss it, but witness it. Johnny did exactly that. And by doing so, he showed what real support looks like. Not offering quick answers, but offering presence. Saying, "I see you. Your pain matters. Take the time you need." If this story resonated with you, think about the veterans in your life. The ones who say they're fine even when they're struggling. Maybe what they need isn't advice or pity. Maybe they need someone willing to listen honestly, to let them be real, to remind them they don't have to be strong every moment. Subscribe for more stories about moments when compassion outweighs entertainment. Share this with a veteran who needs to hear that their struggles are valid. And comment below. How can we better support the people who carry burdens for the rest of us? Because Johnny Carson showed that night that bravery isn't only found in war. It's in coming home and admitting you're hurting. And the most meaningful thing we can offer someone is simply being present when they finally choose to speak.